All right. Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Perfect. Good to have everyone in the Twitter space today, where we'll be discussing cross-chain versus multi-chain. But before we dive into the topic, I'd love to introduce some of our esteemed speakers up here, who will be sharing their thoughts on the topic. Valentin, since you spoke first, do you want to go ahead and give a brief intro?
Sure, Nick. Thanks everyone for listening in. Hope you're doing well. My name is Valentin Vallejo, co-founder lead over here at Quasar. I've been in crypto since I'm 16, so I consider myself an OG. And Quasar built the first and only interchain enabled vault. So we have Cosmos contracts that work with ICA and ICQ, which we co-developed in order to run strategies across multiple Cosmos zones, purely on IBC. Um, and yeah, stoked to be here.
Super. Chango, do you want to go next? And how about we do this? Chango, why don't you pick the next person to enter themselves?
Sure, happy to play some hot potato. So, my name's Chango Unchained, and I've worked on building the Cosmos ecosystem at the very beginning when we were just a small team, and got into the space through Bitcoin before Ethereum was launched. And now I'm working to continue the perpetuation of the expansion of the Cosmos. Thanks for having me. So, I guess Barney is next.
Hi everyone, I'm Barney. I am co-founder of the Vega protocol, which is a app chain for trading derivatives and other financial products. I got into the space sort of similarly in the Bitcoin era and into Ethereum early on in the pre-sale. Yeah, and we're currently working on delivering Vega and sort of delivering on the promise of kind of cross-chain and multi-chain derivatives and trading. Oh, and Hamza, go next.
Hello, thank you for having me here. Uh, yeah, I'm Hamza. I lead DeFi, fintech, and also a bunch of NFT stuff here at Polygon. Polygon is a layer two Ethereum scaling solution with now ZK VM and like a bunch of ZK products. Yeah, I've been here at Matic for the past 2.5 years. But I have a engineering background. Was building a lot of like machine learning stuff before getting into DeFi, and yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome, folks. And with you always, your co-host, alongside the main Evmos account, I'm Nico, one of the Evmos co-founders. So thanks everyone for being here today. We'll be talking about cross-chain versus multi-chain, as I mentioned. Specifically, we're revisiting one of Vitalik's infamous contentious posts on why he thinks multi-chain and not cross-chain is going to be the future. I think we can start off by setting some foundational definitions for what our understanding of what cross-chain and multi-chain are. And so Vitalik in his post defines these zones of sovereignty, right? Where basically the blockchain ecosystem within a zone of sovereignty has control over its own governance, economics, and security, right? And can choose itself what those trade-offs are in protocol. And so when we talk about cross-chain, a cross-chain dApp can cross multiple zones of sovereignty in order to deliver its user experience to the end user, whereas multi-chain dApp needs to be deployed independently to different zones of sovereignty in order to serve the end users within those specific zones. So hope those definitions are clear, and I'm sure we can clarify our understanding as we go one by one to each speaker to kind of share their thoughts on how they think about cross-chain versus multi-chain. Why is it that for the builders who are building cross-chain dApps, why is it that they've decided to go against the grain of conventional wisdom that Vitalik has shared, and kind of challenge that assumption, right? So yeah, why don't we get started? I think we can go in the same order of, Valentin, why don't you go first? And where do you stand on cross-chain versus multi-chain? And how does Quasar like to think about this?
Cross-chain maxis over here, Nico. We are IBC maxis, and I'm very, very strongly skewed towards the cross-chain opinion. When I looked at Vitalik's tweet, it was almost a year ago at this point. In the moment of writing, I didn't disagree with him because the concept of bridges, even the word itself already kind of proves the point. It's built on top of something that existed, which means it has many attack vectors. A bridge can be bombed. Theoretically, a bridge can break down. But with IBC, why I also don't like calling IBC a bridge, you're looking at something that's much closer to a tunnel. It uses, what we already had, the ground, and builds something using existing infrastructure. The difference with IBC, for all listeners, it's the only way to move tokens or information between chains with no added security assumptions beyond the chain's underlying security. And so with the advancements on IBC, especially the ones that we at Quasar did kind of 2 weeks ago with mainnet launch, where now IBC is not just a protocol to move tokens, but also a protocol to move data and to execute entire DeFi strategies. I think that it's kind of a close argument to imagining an internet where websites hosted on Azure or AWS cannot engage with websites hosted on Google Cloud. I don't think that's manageable for anyone. Yet that is kind of the multi-chain thesis, in my opinion. And I do believe that we're going to get to a point in crypto where we abstract away the existence of various chains to the end user to the point where they barely understand, which website host they're engaging with, or on the crypto side, which chain they're engaging with. And so IBC all the way, cross-chain all the way.
Thanks, Valentin. And before we move on, do you want to just give a brief description of what IBC is and generally what light client proof bridging means and how that's different from traditional bridges as we might be used to, just for the audience here who might not be familiar?
Totally.
Oh, looks like you went on mute there.
Oh, I just dropped off. I was saying, honored to be chosen to say that. So
looks like you cut out there, Valentin.
yeah, my data is bad. I'll fix it 1 sec. Maybe.
No worries, no worries. Does anyone else want to pick up the mantle here while Valentin is working on his setup?
Yeah, sure. So, from the vantage point of Vitalik's perspective, his conclusion does make sense if the framework in which you're working on is that there's one primary settlement layer, and that is the Ethereum layer 1, and every other application should be built as a roll up via layer 2, and then stack it up indefinitely into like layer n, right? And if that is if that is your worldview, and you view bridging out of your ecosystem into another ecosystem as hazardous to the security assumptions of the monolithic stack framework, then of course you would come up with that conclusion. The reality of it is that we're in a state of the crypto economy where it's no longer just about monolithic chains. Now, the Ethereum ecosystem has expanded to more than just Ethereum. It has expanded to the broader EVM ecosystem in and of itself, whereby the conversation is now so bleeding edge that we're even talking about abstracting away the underlying settlement layer, and further modularizing that to becoming DA layers with rollups via Celestia's modular stack. So, you know, if we're thinking about Web 2, or like Web 1 and Web 2 and how that evolved, we're looking at, I mean, the equivalent now in the crypto space is before Web 1 had TCP/IP, whereby various intranets are connected to each other with bespoke bridges, and they all have their own unique idiosyncrasies, and there's not been a standardized messaging protocol like TCP/IP that networked the entire network of intranets. That's where we are right now. So in the argument for a multi-chain paradigm where the context is mostly about building one Solidity smart contract and deploying it into multiple EVM compatible chains, that is a subset of what the interchain is meant to be. Like, if you extrapolate where the space is going, and if you think about how Celestia is innovating, and how the app chain paradigm is evolving in the next 10 years, it's likely that we're going to follow a similar trajectory as how Web 1 evolved into Web 2, whereby there is going to become a standardized messaging layer, and IBC is best suited for that. And once that becomes the de facto standard messaging protocol, then we have a network of networks, and there's no longer going to be a need for bespoke bridges, like Vitalik said. I agree that bridges are hazardous to the overall security model of the interchain, but eventually they won't be needed.
Super. Thanks a lot, Chango. Going in the same order as before, Barney, do you have any thoughts to share here? And, what stance Vega takes when it comes to bridging or deploying your application to several chains?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree a lot with what's been said so far. I think from that perspective of kind of a sort of global settlement layer, and perhaps from a perspective of an very, very asymmetric sort of level of security, where you have something like an Ethereum chain that's extremely much more secured and more battle tested than the alternatives. You can kind of look at the cross-chain world as dangerous, and especially before things like IBC become well tested as well. But then from the perspective of where the space and where the industry needs to go, I think that leaves a lot of holes, because you effectively put a huge number of constraints on the development of technology. And sort of like Django said, there's a kind of the development of the internet followed this path of getting some underlying technologies right that enabled a Cambrian explosion of many different types of applications and networks interconnecting and doing things that no one had ever dreamed of. And I think for crypto to come along and for DeFi to replace bits of traditional finance, and for crypto applications to offer a great UX to people around the world for many different use cases, you're going to need chains which make different trade-offs and assumptions. You're going to need app chains in some cases, and you're going to need interoperability between them. And I think, again, as people have said, the hazardous nature of early bridges, particularly, and bridges with poor security assumptions or poor economic models supporting their security, is well documented and well known. And I think that's a phase we want to get through as quickly as possible. And perhaps IBC probably is best placed at this point to be the standard that enables a more cross-chain world.
Thanks, Barney. And we're going to circle back to Valentin to talk about IBC in just a second, but Hamza, wanted to hear your thoughts first.
Yeah, for sure. We I can say about this, like, we've been thinking about this cross-chain multi-chain thing for a while, but we believe that I strongly believe that like Ethereum is the like the one true settlement layer, and like the multi-chain thesis is definitely interesting. I have a lot of thoughts around that, around how like DeFi can grow in a multi-chain environment for sure, but that is not that I don't think it'll be a multi-chain future. It'll be a multi-rollup future, and where like more rollups that inherently rely on the security of an L1, which will most likely be Ethereum. Like that's how you're seeing like Arbitrum, Optimism, and these other even Polygon ZK VM is now live, and like that's how the future is, like securing your own, bootstrapping your own validator set is very hard, and the security parameters, underlying security is very hard to go from 0 to 1 again with every chain that you have, and that's how we think, and that's how like L2s and L3s are. And that's the future, where like if you believe in a multi-chain future, then it is a multi roll-up future rather than a multi L1, so to say, future. And definitely, like I have some thoughts on IBC also. Like it's definitely one of the most elegant solutions out there, and quite frankly, like Polygon is also working on a hub like infrastructure for multiple chains that we are working on.
Thanks for sharing, Hamza. And yeah, just to clarify for our audience here, the multi-rollup feature that you're talking about, Hamza, entails L2s that build upon a single zone of sovereignty. So even though L2s may be considered separate chains, they still settle to and rely on data availability from that same zone of sovereignty. And so even though you might have one L1 with multiple L2s on that, that's all a single zone of sovereignty, whereas cross-chain communication between L1s and between two different L1s falls under that cross-chain definition. So not to get confused here, but thank you for introducing that concept, and I'm sure we'll be referring back to it many times in this panel. Before going into a deep dive on the specifics of the pros and cons of each one, just wanted to circle back to Valentin to finish off his explanation of IBC, because that's another term that's going to be coming up, and I wanted to make sure that we were clear on that.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nico. I hope my mic is fixed now. Super interesting, by the way, to hear the different opinions. I'm very eager to dive deeper into the discussion. But yeah, to get the listeners up to speed, IBC. So imagine if you look at like normal bridges, right? Multi-sig bridges, trusted bridges, centralized bridges. It's almost like if you want to trade between two countries, using a centralized bridge, because you can never actually move a token between two chains properly. What using a centralized bridge means is you essentially have a company that tells you, oh yeah, we're going to write you a piece of paper that's going to tell the country you fly to that you own this much money in the bank, right? And then you just hope for the entire duration of your stay in the other country that piece of paper is still valid, and that country still exists, the bank still exists. And it's a pretty foreign concept to run an entire economy on just pieces of paper that have a signature of an entity you barely know, that at any point, if that entity implodes, that piece of paper is worthless, without ever being able to move the actual assets to the country you're visiting. IBC is much closer to having a standardized port infrastructure where every country decides that the container should be this specific size, and you can fill the container with information, and you can send containers from one port to another as long as it fits into the standard. You can also use the passport analogy, right? You always have your, the passport of the country you're from, so you always have the origin chain. But if you visit other countries, they have a way to acknowledge that this is a proper passport, you're a proper citizen of a specific country, even though they assign it their own number by putting a stamp into your passport, right? So while in IBC you have a kind of a path of which the passport takes based on the stickers it accumulates, the underlying passport can be verified as accurate by all in the chain as long as they agree to the standard for the passport should look like. So IBC really is the only way, apart from obviously just code risk that always exists, the only way to move assets between chains with no added security assumptions but the chains themselves, right? If you have a country that has low security on the border, it may be a risk factor for the passport holder to be in that country, but that doesn't mean that other countries that use passports are implicated by this. And the exciting thing is that now, instead of just being able to move the passports, you're starting to move entire DeFi executions and more across IBC. Not to go too much off rail, but I see we have Yelena and Riley listening in, founders of Noble and Stride respectively. What I would consider to be 2.0 Cosmos as well, where we essentially all our three products are just building on top of the passport system to add to the countries and to give countries the ability to benefit from the ability to move between countries, right? So you can look at this as a bit like if Ethereum was the United States, Cosmos is a bit like the European Union, where you have your own countries, but there's a standard of movement and a standard of essentially asset transactions between them.
Gotcha. Thanks, everyone. I think we can start to move deeper now into sort of the technical trade-offs, and we might spend about 20 or 25 minutes on this section. And so yeah, this is fairly open, no ordering to the speakers here, but when trying to build out for your use cases, how do you evaluate the different trade-offs and the way they affect your application or blockchain in terms of things like scalability, being able to reach as many users as possible, or security, which is I think the primary concern here when it comes to bridging, as well as potentially things like the user experience that we may not often talk about.
Yeah, well, first of all, the model that the entire space has been working off of before is that if you are trying to launch a dApp, your security is enshrined in whatever DA layer that you're launching it on. For example, on the Ethereum virtual machine, you need to rely on the security guarantees and the underlying gas fee token ETH for operating your dApp. Whereas in Cosmos, it's about whether or not you could launch your own layer one as its app chain, right? But I think that in the future, it looks something more of like a hybrid between the two models now that we have Celestia rollup ecosystem rolling out. So now if you know that you don't want to bootstrap your own validator set, and you don't necessarily need to run your dApp as a heavy, through the heavy lifting of a Cosmos SDK app chain, then you could simply use a DA layer. And we're at a point where we're at the bleeding edge of abstracting away the lower settlement layers like Ethereum, Bitcoin, Celestia, what have you, to a point where in the future you could kind of mix and match DA layers. So I think that world's going to be interesting. And if we realize that world, then we could see potentially 90% of applications being built as rollups and not as sovereign app chains, or as Solidity smart contracts on someone else's hosted VM. I'd be interested in seeing that. And when it comes to that point, the trade-off that you would make as a dApp developer, you would make significantly less trade-offs as you had to before, when you had a limited set of options to choose from.
Gotcha. So in the future that you see, Chango, where you can, as you said, you have this modular stack that gives you access to a broader set of data availability layers, which you refer to as DA layers, in addition to settlement layers that may not be baked into the DA layer. Whereas Ethereum is monolithic in that sense. There are certain innovations in Cosmos that let you mix and match, as you mentioned. What does that all do for how do you think about the security trade-offs there? Does that make things more secure, less secure as Ethereum, etc.? And I also want to prompt Hamza here, because I know you've probably given this a lot of thought as well. So if you want to add anything to this kind of roll-up centric future, but not necessarily roll-ups on Ethereum.
Imagine a world where you have something like mesh security. But I mean, like if you look at a monolithic stack, what is it composed of? It's primarily composed of the execution layer, security layer, and then the DA layer, right? And so if you're able to mix and match execution with settlement and or security and DA, what does that world look like? And if you're able to, I guess, like mesh secure in multiple bilateral agreements with other blockchains that have their own security premiums, like with Bitcoin and Ethereum, then the whole is altogether more secure than its parts. Is what I'm trying to get at, right? It's in this mesh secured model, we're talking about a network of mycelium, like um, Zaki and Sunny mentioned in the Bankless podcast some time ago. It's that this cross chain paradigm gets to um, take away the sum of all of the security premium of the underlying DA layers, or like Bitcoin and Ethereum. And if you're able to mix and match, then it's greater than if you were just to launch your own app chain with its own small market cap at the beginning. Or it could be greater than just that of the enshrined settlement of one layer one, like that of Ethereum. Because if you could mesh secure with Ethereum and another chain in a proof of stake world, then the amount of collateral that's at stake is going to be more than the amount of collateral at stake in any one ecosystem.
Gotcha. Hamza, do you have anything to say when it comes to things like, design trade-offs when thinking about the kinds of products that Polygon wants to build, and where do you see, Polygon positioning itself in this future?
Yeah, for sure. See, like I said earlier, like we definitely believe that this multi-chain future is the way. For sure, there is no doubt about that. You must have seen even the recent IMX immutable announcement that went out, and the idea there is that immutable will become like the gaming layer 2 for Ethereum, using Polygon tech, and on we're working on other technologies also in that way, that that can have the same impact. Like if you can have your own DeFi chain, and like we are working on that side as well, like your DeFi L2 rolling up on Ethereum, built on like the same Polygon ZK VM, and like there'll be like 100 chains. There is Nubank, which is like a very big fintech out of Latam and Brazil, and they already have their own stable coin as gas and like as loyalty points in their app, and all of that, and they are all like using the Polygon Supernet infrastructure to build their own chain. However, what we feel is that like building your own chain, not just chain but bootstrapping your own security is very hard. Like that part is extremely difficult to do. I mean, it's not difficult, it's difficult to maintain. What I mean is like it's very difficult to maintain. Not many apps can do that. However, however good it may sound, it's not practical. Like we have seen that. So yeah, I feel like the roll up way is the way forward, where you inherently depend on the L1 security, whichever L1 that is, which you like.
When you talk about the difficulty around bootstrapping security, what are some of the challenges there?
Yeah, you initially need like apps. Like I will tell you, like this project, these are all fintechs, right? Like we are seeing a mass inflow of fintech, of games, of enterprises and Web2 companies that want to run their chain because they want to either control native minting of assets and whitelisting and blacklisting of there are multiple reasons why they want to run their own chain, and they don't want to share data to the public information, which is understandable. So they need to firstly they need to have like a first decentralized validator set, which is very difficult for a web 2 company to bootstrap, or even like a gaming company to bootstrap, where they just want to mint $2 or $5 or $10 of gaming assets over like millions of times. It's very difficult for them to they're not in this business of blockchain maintenance and blockchain infrastructure. So it's difficult for them to bootstrap on day one, and without that they can't even run their business. So that is one thing. Second thing is getting the stake. Or not everyone wants to launch a token, in especially in this enterprise, and not just enterprise but like gaming and fintech projects. Not everyone is willing to do a token, and ready to use their token as stake and all of that. Yeah, not everyone is ready to do that. So yeah, like these two three things are very crucial that we have seen.
If I may hop in, Nico. Hey Hamza, pleasure meeting you. Super interesting to kind of get different side. That's not just all on the cross chain side, but I would like to kind of see if we can find a middle ground, because to me what I hear between the lines is the argument you're making is that Web2 and like legacy businesses would like to choose having basically almost white label as a service, right? Like chain as a service. And I don't think I'd necessarily disagree with you, but to me, I think the biggest kind of disconnect is that those applications usually don't need to interact with DeFi and other crypto bases, right? They use the baseline blockchain for the very easy kind of for the benefits, but not for engagement in between. In which I would argue that a multi-chain future, if you don't have sufficient bridging technology, that's not just an afterthought, which I feel like it currently very much is. You are sacrificing a ton of liquidity and a ton of efficiency of capital by the fragmentation of such in all different rollups. I mean, there's so many by now, right? And there's so many different layer ones and layer twos that we had the same issue in Cosmos, right? Like this is not something that we're calling out. Like I'm calling out that only Ethereum has, but we kind of assigned to solve this by building more and more on the infrastructure that connects us being IBC. So my argument is anything legacy and anything that is a state machine by itself, like a gaming, like a game, would maybe want to go for white label service, but anything that wants to interact with the DeFi native ecosystem would prefer to choose a cross-chain solution. To add to that, just quickly on your validator argument, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that the motivations you voiced in which why those companies want to choose having that being done for them is the reason why we have replicated security and mesh security coming into Cosmos, right? Interchain security, for instance, or replicated now again, right? We have Riley from Stride here. It's essentially a plug-and-play solution to getting the validator set from Atom Hub, right, from Cosmos. And I feel like that seems to be a middle ground, or at least our variation of what you guys deem to be the right approach on Ethereum. Would like to hear your thoughts if you agree.
Yeah, for sure. Like I'm a big fan of mesh security. I know I have a lot of friends in the Cosmos space, and like I was when the paper came last year, I was sitting down and chatting about it with some of them about this for sure. To your like I definitely, but it's like a bit down the line. So I mean, we are keeping a close eye on that, and like we are working. Like I said, we are working on a hub design ourselves on how to communicate between multiple chains, and because we want to keep Matic token at the center of it, so that Matic token generates revenue from all these 100 chains that are created using Polygon infrastructure, whether it is immutable. Tomorrow there is like some DeFi chain for this, whether it is ZKVM, whether it is Nubank chain, or like whichever fintech chain it is, or gaming chains that come. Like we want to make sure that Matic token becomes the center. To your point of communication and DeFi liquidity sharing, I understand, but that cross chain and having a central hub is important with IBC and like that like osmosis and those kind of things. However, I still don't understand why. And I've spoken this before also. Like I don't understand how uh, you know why there are no more DeFi chains in Cosmos. It's because what I feel is like it's very difficult to to have. I mean, you fragment liquidity, right? Like there will always be some winners, one or two main winners, whereas like liquidity will just like 80-20 rule. It will just die down after that.
Yeah. So let me try and, reading between the lines here, let me try and break down some of the concerns raised by Hamza. And Valentin, it looks like you have some more stuff to say, and would love to hear that
Always,
from you.
always, yeah. But I'll keep it short. I think that the main issue for me is that when you say Cosmos does not needs more DeFi chains, I would say it needs less DeFi chains, because DeFi chains are trying to become hubs, and I think that the biggest issue for user experience in Cosmos is that every chain is trying to become a hub, and I think that the point is the app chain thesis allows you to specify a certain use case. I would argue most certain use case is the EVM compatibility, right? That in itself is like a use case, and so allowing the IBC layer to be the main driver between engagement of apps makes IBC the DeFi of Cosmos in the future. So I think that looking at Cosmos and like who will be the hub that wins is a zero sum argument, and looking at Cosmos as IBC is the connector between different applications that together compose DeFi is the multiplier angle.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, great point, Valentin, as well. To summarize Hamza's initial arguments here, the way I understood it is there's two main axes for which you must make considerations for folks who want to launch their own applications, whether that's as a smart contract built on top of an existing chain, or an app chain itself. In the app chain case, you have this operational concern that it's difficult to encourage a decentralized validator set to form around kind of your use case, this application that you want to build. In addition to that, Hamza, you raised concerns around the fact that some people may not want to actually launch a token for economic security, right? In the case of a proof of stake based chain, right? And in the case that they do, there's no guarantee that the chain itself will garner enough of a good enough bonding ratio in order to maintain the security of the chain, right? Contrast this to Ethereum that has, that is secured by billions of dollars worth of bonded, staked Ethereum, I guess is what it's called there. Now, I guess with that in mind, Valentin, the points that you raised is basically that like in response to what Hamza said about, hey, actually, there is this kind of winner takes all dynamic in DeFi. What you were saying essentially is that actually the hub and spoke model is not necessarily the only model that exists within Cosmos, and that if I'm to paraphrase a little bit, the way that I personally like to think about it is that when people talk about, for example, TVL is a huge metric in DeFi, and the way somebody from the Ethereum side would see, TVL on chain A, let's say Osmosis, is that is just Osmosis TVL, and TVL on Evmos or Injective or Juno or any other Cosmos chain, those are just those independent chains TVL. But the way you're framing it is that it's not actually TVL that is restricted to that individual chain, but in fact, it's the real way to think about it is this notion of shared TVL, because all this TVL can travel across IBC, which means that every Cosmos chain has access to every other Cosmos chain's pool of liquidity simultaneously. Is that right?
Absolutely, and I think that the kind of the next generation is specifically those applications that connect that. I think that is kind of the driving force for Cosmos Season 2.0.
Gotcha. Now, I actually wanted to turn to Barney for a second, but I don't. Oh, there you are, Barney. What kind of things did you have to think about when considering whether to launch Vega as its own application chain versus, as a dApp built on top of Ethereum, or even a rollup built on top of Ethereum? What went through your team's minds
I mean,
there?
I think, and I think there's sort of two orthogonal concepts here. And one is how we move value around between chains, how we secure applications that operate on chain. And I'm definitely a fan of the sort of mesh security model, and the idea that actually what you want to do is sort of import security from nodes in the network rather than from like some particular L1 chain. But when we're thinking about building Vega, actually, it starts with user experience, and it starts with how do you build something that can win. And what I mean by that is, when I look at DeFi on Ethereum, for instance, and I look at performance, I look at throughput, I look at costs, gas costs, and everything else, and then I think of all of the systems that I have used and built in the past in the traditional centralized finance world for trading systems and whatever, and exchanges. And you sort of ask yourself the question, how do you build something on chain that could challenge those systems, that could take liquidity, not from DeFi on Ethereum, but from CeFi? And I think it's absolutely essential to think that way, because much of what happens in DeFi in crypto is not sort of real world useful. It's actually a lot of the time people experimenting, people using crypto that they were sort of going to hold anyway, and trying out new things, which is fantastic. And there's always going to be the early adopters. But when we actually take a look at many of these protocols and services that we've built so far in DeFi, there's not a clear route to real world adoption, real world use. So we sort of started with the users, with the user experience, with the cost, with the capital efficiency. And we said, what would it take to build a system that could compete? And the answer really was, you need an app chain. The answer was, you need to be able to do things like control how fees work to secure the chain directly related to the protocol we're building, in order to have a fee model that makes sense for trading, for example. So we started from that point of view, and actually, designed and built, the idea of an app chain around that. And then you start to answer questions, well, how can we secure this chain? And how can we get value onto this chain? Because just because we're building a trading chain, that doesn't mean we think everyone is going to suddenly use Vega as the global settlement layer, or as the place to issue their tokens. So then we start to say, okay, where does the value come from that's traded on this chain? How does it get secured? And from that perspective, it's a very pragmatic point of view, which is, we build the app chain, and we build the most pragmatic first version that works. So in fact, we have connectivity into Ethereum bridge, secured by the validators on our chain. We have ERC20s tradable on chain in the first iteration, and we have the security of our validators with a little bit of sort of imported backstop security, if you like, from the Ethereum chain, because our native token is actually in ERC20. So there's a few things from the staking point of view on our chain that actually happen on the Ethereum chain rather than on our chain, which provides a little bit of sort of additional security under certain scenarios. But a lot of that's pragmatic. And what I mean by that is, when we look at where we were when we started, IBC was not ready, and was still a sort of proposal and papers coming out and everything. But when I look at the future, it's kind of, we want to see IBC succeed. We want to connect into IBC. We want to move value between chains. We want to have the best possible security assumptions when doing so. We want to have the ability to borrow and import security from other chains and share security with other nodes in the sort of global crypto network. So we want to see all those things happen, and to move towards that world. But really, the starting point for us was, what's the user experience that's necessary? How does the product need to work? How do we make it able to be in the sort of medium to long term competitive with TradFi? And then once you've figured out what's absolutely essential, you can work out the architecture you need to build around that, and build an application there, if that makes sense.
Totally. So I'm hearing a brand new trade-off here, which is basically like this desire to go beyond what's available on traditional on the traditional stack, on the canonical DA settlement layer, which is Ethereum today. Maybe you don't want to run the EVM. Maybe you want to be able to have control over your gas fees, etc. And that's what necessitates building a whole new foundation separate from Ethereum, but still, retaining that need to transact across the security boundaries of each respective chain.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. And I think the thing that's exciting about some of the sort of Celestia style modular blockchains is if you change where you put the abstraction layers, then the ability to build sort of, app chains or rollups or whatever that import the security and data availability, but that still have the sort of execution layer working perhaps in a way that's more aligned with what's needed to build the application. There's some really exciting stuff there.
Gotcha.
Barney's is an anecdotal evidence of the lower bound of demand for app chains. Like if you look at the development progression for a lot of apps that have exceeded the scaling needs, like if you take DOIDX for example, like the trajectory is usually I'm going to launch my proof of concept on Ethereum, and after I've reached a certain scale, I need a higher throughput. I need greater guarantees for my users and better user experience via more competitive gas fees. And then they move towards building their own app chain. So there's always going to be that lower bound of demand for app chains, and it's not going to go anywhere, right? You never see app chains then pivoting and going, okay, well now this idea failed and I'm going to now deploy my app as a smart contract on Ethereum. It doesn't go the other way. And so to provide to serve the demand side for this, there needs to be some answer to the cross-chain thesis that will seamlessly integrate with the multi-chain ecosystem, but you don't really see evidence of the multi-chain ecosystem becoming being the end all be all answer to applications in the future, especially not when they need to scale to hundreds of millions of users. I mean, we're still in such a nascent phase of the crypto economy where it's still in the toy phase and not really at the production scaling phase to hundreds of millions of users yet. So to get to that point, we do need rollups on DA layers. We do need app chains, and there needs to be like a TCP/IP layer for this entire network right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really great example. I think DYDX is the thing that's fantastic about the DYDX example is you can see them go through that. We're going to build this amazing derivatives protocol. I remember when they guys first in their Slack and a465 and investor, we're going to build this amazing derivatives protocol on Ethereum. And then it's kind of like, okay, we've outgrown that. We're going to do it on Starkware. And then it's like, okay, we're basically building the same thing that Vega built because we come to the same conclusion, which is this needs that. And so, watching someone go through that have a lot of users, a lot of money, and watching them go through that and come to those conclusions, it sort of is just evidence to me that if there was a solution on Ethereum, or if there was a solution with just Ethereum L2s, they would have found it and done it. And it really shows that the right move is in that direction.
Thank you both, and I really love that framing of the lower, the lower bound of demand for this kind of thing. I haven't heard that framing before, but it totally makes sense, right? Like even today, you see people, despite all of the, despite Vitalik's warnings, I guess, people are still building app chains because they want that customization. And so the real question to ask here isn't, multi-chain versus cross-chain, because cross-chain is happening and multi-chain is also happening. But maybe the real question is, how do we make cross-chain more secure, given that it's going to happen anyway, given that developers are going to need additional features and additional customization, and that they're going to want to build in a cross-chain future. Yeah, fantastic points made so far. Folks, a lot of you have talked about exciting innovations coming to, the cross-chain, multi-chain space, especially, for security. I know Chango and Valentin, you both mentioned replicated security, mesh security, interchain security. Hamza, you also chimed in there and added that Polygon has been looking at some of these solutions and working on a ton of innovations themselves. Curious to know, if we could take out our crystal ball, how do you see these innovations continuing to play out over the rest of 2023 and into 2024? And what are you most excited about as we're coming to a close here?
Great question. I think that I feel like a couple rollups are going to die, and a couple app chains are going to decide to move to replicated security, or to mesh security, as bootstrapping your own validator set, as Hamza rightfully said, is a ton of work. I think that the biggest overlying meta, I guess, prediction I would do is that most users will probably not know what they're interacting with a couple years in the future. I mean, we're already starting to see that in Cosmos, where most users don't understand that the apps they're using are L1s by themselves, right? And I think that is kind of the point. Do you really care if the website you're using is hosted on AWS or Google Cloud? No, you only care that it's secure, it loads fast, your data is safe, and you can, buy what you want to buy. So my prediction is going to be abstraction away of the technical side of all of DeFi and crypto by stronger implementation of IBC beyond Cosmos into EVM chains, and then essentially a smooth user experience of transferring funds between those app chains.
Thanks, Valentin. Anyone else have predictions for 2023, 2024 in terms of the innovations coming to this landscape? That was quite a bold prediction, by the way, Valentin. That's
I'm always bold, you know me. I'm always out there.
Some rollups are going to die and transition into being app chains themselves. Excited to see how that plays out. Maybe we'll have a follow-up call at the end of the year to see if that's happened. Hamza, I see you've unmuted.
One thing which I've always been interested, although I've never seen anything, or if people have information, please would love to read about it, is that flash loans are a very important part of DeFi, especially stable coins being stable, and volume, volume coming into dexes, especially stable dexes, stable pools. That is very important. And I've not seen, and I've discussed this with many Cosmos people, and the only piece of code, not even code, it was an idea by Zaki. I think it was Zaki, around Cinderella tokens, around like how can you move like how can you do cross chain flash loans, because if you the situation that I see is that, like, if you borrow from one chain, you have to close it on the other chain, and that is very difficult without a flash loan, because, like, I mean, it's not difficult. It's like, economically it becomes worth to keep assets at the same point. So if you like to ask me, I would be curious to see how asynchronous composability works across chain. So yeah, that is one or two things I'll be curious to see what happens.
Gotcha. Barney, Chango, anything you guys are excited about?
Yeah, I could go. So my brain works in seeing into the future 3 to 5 years in advance. I'm less of a short term person, and less of a like long term, maybe past 10 years, but more of, yeah, right. So in that respect, I actually want my brain is on how Celestia is pushing the modular stack, because and including the mesh security thesis. So if you blend where those two features are going, in retrospect, if it's 10 years from now, it's going to be it looks obvious that these were the core pieces of infrastructure that would have enabled the internet of blockchains, or the interchain rather. So I'm interested to see that IBC pick up steam and get adopted as the standardized messaging layer for all of the ecosystems, including between rollups, after bridges become obsolete. And I'm interested to see technology innovate towards the ability to do mesh secured, doing like mesh secure and like mesh DA kind of come to fruition, because eigen DA is one answer to that, and Polygon, Avail, they're all of these different previous, side chains and roll-ups to Ethereum are now saying, okay, well, we're going to offer just a simple DA layer and not just a monolithic L1, to kind of speak to that narrative. So I think that that's highly experimental right now, but it's a thesis that makes total sense to me, the same way that the Cosmos thesis of multiple app chains made sense to me in 2016. When the world was talking about, everything's going to be hosted on Ethereum. It just doesn't make sense to me in that respect. But the composability of DA and settlement is really interesting, and I'd look at that in the future.
Right. That kind of orthogonal argument of, regardless of whether we go multi-chain or cross-chain, there is still this idea of the modular stack where you can slot things in and out and replace them, as you mentioned, at many layers of the stack.
And there's going to be overlap anyway, and not one or the other is
For
what
sure.
it looks like.
And Barney.
Yeah, I think, and probably to sort of expand on that as a sort of, their modularity and app chains are in a way, I think, are sort of two sides of a similar coin, which is a desire to optimize and to build something that's maybe an order of magnitude better than what we can do with, just say an EVM application. And with the app chain side of things, it's like we're building a bunch of stuff that's very bespoke in order to get an absolutely better trade-off. But the other side of that is the modular stack and the modularity allowing you to select data availability layers or other aspects of the sort of the on-chain environment to make the right trade-offs for any given application. And when I think forward, maybe it's 2-3 years, maybe it's a little sooner in some cases. What I think, we've lived in an unbelievably constrained world of building applications on chain since the birth of Ethereum and even before attempting to build things on Bitcoin. And I think that what the likes of IBC, what the sort of modular stack, what app chains bring us is probably 1 or 2 orders of magnitude reduction in those constraints. So basically, the constraints and that app developers have been under that have created some of the kind of on-chain solutions and trade-offs that we have today with the primarily Ethereum-driven ecosystem. Those constraints are going to be lifted considerably by this new technology and by these things sort of coming online and becoming mainstream. And that will just enable a huge sort of flurry of improvements, additional, better apps, new types of app, better experiences, better UX. And I think it's really exciting to see how that will enable, the next phase of whether it's DeFi or whether it's on-chain gaming, whether it's NFTs. So I'm super excited to see that.
Totally. A breakthrough feature like account abstraction can't currently happen on Ethereum, at least not in protocol. But it can be done through, like EIP 4337, and sort of seeing how that can be done in Cosmos world or in cross-chain world definitely helps to see how that innovation can be brought back into the fold for Ethereum world as well. Circling back on one last thing that Hamza mentioned, which is a final trade-off that we hadn't discussed earlier, which is like this atomicity / synchrony property that you lose when you go cross-chain. And I think that's important to consider. And I think there are a few teams. I think the interchain scheduler idea from the Atom 2.0 paper is somewhat in line with this, in addition to some of the work that the MEV folks in Cosmos, both Skip and Mechatech, are thinking about also. So Hamza, if you wanted to dig deeper into that, highly recommend looking into what those two teams are doing. Well, folks, I think we're at time, but I wanted to give you a chance to say some final words. What is the most important piece of advice you'd give to builders in the space as they think about cross-chain versus the multi-chain debate? And of course, how can people keep up with what you're doing, what you're working on, each of your respective projects? Valentin, since I know you probably need to hop off,
Yep.
Feel free to go first. What's your advice there?
I'll keep it super short. Look at replicated security versus mesh security versus building on an existing app chain, depending on your needs, and specifically look at which pipelines and liquidity are you choosing and if those are safe for your users to engage with after they've bridged over. You can find me here on the Twitter. Our Quasar account is listening in at quasar.fi. Thanks everyone so much. I loved it, and talk to you guys soon.
talk soon. Thank you very much. Chango, do you want to give some advice?
Hey, yeah. So listen to the Interchain FM podcast. That's not really advice, but a shameless plug. But we share alpha, like nothing but pure alpha on that podcast.
Hey, we take
So
those.
yeah, and look at, if you are currently our delegator on Interchain FM stake, be on the lookout for some messaging in the future as we're gearing up for a drop before OsmoCon Paris in July.
Thank you very much. Hamza, what advice would you give to builders as they think about cross-chain / multi-chain trade-offs, and how can people keep up with your work?
Yeah, you can definitely keep up with Polygon by, of course, with the Polygon website, polygon.technology, and of course the Discord, and mainly the blog that has updates. If those ZK VM updates are coming, and there is a major update on the POS chain as well, and then L3s and L2s. But yeah, I'm pretty excited about the state of rollups, and I'm pretty excited about the ERC standards as well. There are few standards that allow very very good composability, multi-chain composability, like 4626 wall tokens. I'm pretty excited about that, how that takes place, and like how you can move yield-bearing assets across chains. And I think that will be a building block of the very near roll-up, multi-roll-up future. So yeah.
Thank you very much. And finally, Barney,
Yeah, I mean,
what advice would you give to
I think,
builders?
the advice I would give is to sort of to think really big. I think we're still at the very beginning of a lot of this journey, and so whereas in a lot of the time, if you're building and developing things, using tried and tested technology is a great way to do things, and you're always looking for the cutting edge is not necessarily the best thing to do. I think in this space right now where we are, there's so much coming that's going to have such a sea change to the ability of builders to deliver really high value to their users with great UX that paying attention to this new stuff that's coming and getting it out front of it is going to be incredibly valuable and is really worth doing. And if you want to keep up with Vega, check out vega.xyz, or check out my Twitter at Barnaby, or at Vega Protocol, or check out our Discord. Cheers.
Thank you very much. And as the age-old adage goes, we're so early. Thank you to all our speakers for chiming in with their thoughts, and to all of our audience members for listening. This was a great panel, great space. As always, this conversation was kicked off by an article we put out, revisiting Vitalik's cross-chain versus multi-chain thesis. So encourage you to give that a read. It's pinned to the top of this Twitter space. And also, if you enjoyed the content here, chime in at Consensus, where you'll be able to listen to more big brains share their thoughts on this and other topics at EVM Next, which is an event focused on the future of the cross-chain smart contracts and the EVM more generally. Thanks again to everybody. We'll have multiple follow-up calls to this one, I'm sure, and we'll see you next time. Take care. See you soon.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.